is drowning in data while starving for wisdom. He said, henceforth, the world will be run by synthesizers. The semiconductor industry is the essentially forcing function of humankind. Semiconductor is enabling humankind to document, share, and learn in ways that we haven't before.
Could you give us an overview of the company's core approach to inventory management and supply chain optimization?
We just announced the acquisition of Schenker, DB Schenker. So combined will be number one by, don't quote me on this, but double-digit percentages. So at 15 to 20% will be number one. The world runs on DSV Global, right? Their mantra is to keep the world running through disruptions, through turmoil, through strife, no matter what. With the turnkey, one PO every month, you pay us the dollar amount based upon the transactions. DSV has this facility in Texas called Big Tex, and it's 2.1 million square feet of warehouse space, 1.1 and then 1 in these two kind of immediately adjacent buildings. Huge. It takes hours to walk around, right? And pallet racking to the ceiling and so on and so forth. They have drones. It's the only service-based company doing inventory management, a recognition group. I believe out of 7,000 suppliers, only 27 received the Epic Award.
Last year, recognized by Intel.
Yes.
With the Intel Epic Distinguished Supplier Award.
That's right. That's right.
What sets DSV IMS apart from other suppliers in Intel's vast ecosystem, as one would say?
I bleed Intel blue. Sure, they need to get hungry. What you're going to see is a level of automation in the logistics side that will blow your mind. So do I really need copy exactly? And does copy exact, when does it not hold true anymore? Here's the deal. I don't know how else to say it. We cannot have a trade deficit of trillions of dollars. Seek to understand, like really care because you care to care, not because you think it's some short-term goal. Be one of those early adopters. The world is changing faster than we can even forecast. Figuring out how to adopt and synergize and integrate those technologies into your day-to-day will enable you to build those relationships faster and really grow your career faster. A single throat to choke, one owner for all your supply chain. If you don't have the right structure and governance over how you're housing, storing, aggregating, quantifying your data, so it's not garbage in, garbage out. We cannot be a consumption society. We have to build stuff, and we have to be able to work on stuff. At the center of all that isn't negotiating tactic, it's relationships. Building meaningful relationships with your stakeholders in supply chain is what it's all about. Ultimately, a high context interaction where you're building relationships, it provides value that is just irreplaceable.
Join us as we welcome Stuart Love, a leader in supply chain solutions. With deep expertise gained from almost 20 years at Intel,
Stuart understands the intricacies of the semiconductor supply chain. Now, as Director of Global Supply Chain at DSV, he's shaping the future of 5PL, offering end-to-end supply chain management.
From materials sourcing to digital transformation, Stuart's insights are crucial for navigating today's complex global landscape. Let's dive in.
Hello, and welcome back to the Semiconductor Leadership Podcast. I'm your host, Salah Nasri. And whether you're an industry veteran or someone that's just curious about semiconductor manufacturing, this is your podcast. We'll be covering the latest and greatest in semiconductor manufacturing, from R&D insights, cutting-edge technology, and also leadership strategies. So I have a small little favor to you all. Click that subscribe button. We've just hit 2.5K followers, past 1 million impressions. Let's get these numbers higher and higher and higher. And that way, we'll be able to get you top-notch guests like our guest today. So, without further ado, it is with my great pleasure to welcome Stuart Love, who is working with DSV. Stuart, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me. It's a pleasure to be here.
Pleasure. So, Stuart, I mean, based on your professional journey and getting straight into it, you've had nearly a 2-decade experience at Intel, right?
That's right.
I'd be intrigued to learn what were the key leadership roles that you held within the global supply chain organization. I mean, you look at Intel, it's not the smallest company in the world, right? So please entice us.
Indeed, yeah. So I was there almost 20 years, came straight out of school, held a variety of different positions there, all in the global supply chain. As you can imagine, the supply chain at Intel is very complex, right? Hundreds and hundreds of suppliers and tens of thousands of parts and dozens of factories all throughout the world. So there's a lot of transformation that happens throughout 2 decades in the supply chain at Intel. The first 9 years in earnest was supporting the fab and PTD, so the technology development of the silicon wafer fabs. So with equipment, materials, services, and planning and operations, I guess, the kind of full gamut of activities, supporting fab and TD. And then the subsequent 10 years, I was supporting ATTD and ATM. So this is the technology development for assembly test and then the high volume manufacturing of assembly test. So I held a variety of roles there as well, from purchasing and planning manager to sourcing of assembly equipment, and most recently, before leaving, memory sourcing of our high bandwidth memory, low power, discrete graphics, as well as SSD and flash memory.
Wow.
So I've seen the full spectrum, with the exception of the indirect side. I never got into the kind of marketing and HR sourcing. But if it had to do with our factories or technology, materials or equipment and operations, that's where I was.
Marvelous. So were you based out of Oregon or were you based out of Arizona? I mean, ATD's in Arizona.
Correct, yeah. So it's a great question. I went to the university in New Mexico and dual degreed there, and then started with Intel in New Mexico. And then I relocated to Phoenix in 2011. So I was there for about 13 years or so.
Intrigued. What did you study? What were you?
Dual degreed. So one, marketing. So, talking, communicating, understanding what folks require and kind of that marketing orientation. And then also have a degree in production operations management. So that's kind of quantitative supply chain management, theory of constraints, right? Capacity design, Q theory, optimization of warehousing and logistic channels and stuff. Before supply chain was a degree, believe it or not. So this was right at the kind of inception of supply chain as a discipline that was getting its own degree program, its own department and such. And now it's all the rage, as you can imagine.
Sure. So why semiconductor industry?
Oh, man, that's... I guess I kind of fell into it, but why stay? Right. Because like any job straight out of school, right? You're looking for the pay, you're looking for the growth, you're looking for the experience and so on. Intel happened to be there, kind of fell into it. Why did I stay? Intel is a behemoth in semi, and you can learn almost every aspect of semi from Intel's supply chain and being, employed there for, if you're lucky enough, a couple of decades. The semiconductor industry is the essentially foreseen function of humankind, right? I might be going out on a limb here, but in my opinion, it truly is. If you look at the advancements of our data, of our, I'll call it information, although sometimes the modern media isn't being used for informative purposes, but rather nonetheless, but the age of information, it's built on silicon. Right. If you look at the way that our medical, industry is going, how we're treating, how we're diagnosing, how we're experimenting and designing solutions, finding solutions, it's all based in technology. Whether it be crunching data, whether it be storing data so it's available at a moment's notice, whether it be communicating across kind of, multicultural or geographic boundaries, All of that is being made possible by semiconductor. And so then you look at cool things like consumer products and, automotive industry and transportation and, the smartwatches and the Fitbits and that's all super cool as well. And you can touch and feel that, and the pixels in your home and so on. But in earnest, semiconductor is enabling humankind to document, share, and learn in ways that we haven't before. And we're just talking terrestrially, right? I mean, we look at extraterrestrially, like it's phenomenal, right? So it's very exciting. It's always geeked me out, honestly, my inner nerd. So that's why I've stayed.
Intriguing. So this is going to be the quite an interesting one. So evidently, 19 years at Intel. So that means you were dedicated to the role. You were dedicated to the company.
Yep.
To the blue logo.
I bleed blue.
Blue, and now you shifted to another blue, all right? I think I'm right. Danish blue. It's a Danish blue.
That's right.
What inspired you to go right, I've been 19 years at Intel.
Yeah.
I'm going to move to a large global supply chain. It is potentially the largest up there, right? DSV Inventory Management Solutions.
Yeah.
As director of special projects.
Yep.
How did that come about?
Like all good things, through relationships.
Okay.
Right. So people make the world go round, for sure. I had been in discussions with DSV for some period of time about, kind of coming over and what are you guys doing and what journey are you on? And here's your business model. It intrigued me. I actually managed the commodity. My team led that commodity when I was at Intel in 2012, 13, and 14. So I was familiar with this kind of vendor managed, 4, 5PL. 5PL wasn't a thing yet, but the 4PL, definitely 3PL vendor managed inventory solutions. I'm very familiar with that commodity, right? Not just DSV, but also its competitors, right? Because we source through multiple different channels, as you can imagine, being Intel in this size. So I was aware it wasn't a huge step away from semiconductor because DSV IMS is still supporting a lot of high tech and semiconductor clients and customers. So it's an adjacent move. But really, the reason I came over is because I wanted to be the provisioner of this solution as opposed to the recipient, right? So I have seen the benefits of intelligent analytics, big data management, digitalization of our supply chain and kind of transparency across all the nodes, business continuity planning, sub-tier supplier management, obviously all the terms and conditions and negotiation, contract management, and those kinds of things. But I've seen that at Intel when I held the checkbook, if you will, right? Not my money, but nonetheless in sourcing, going out and really getting the biggest bang for the buck, figuring out what the right solution is, mitigating, risk geopolitically or environmentally or whatever the case may be. I wanted to bring that solution to bear for customers that don't have it internally. And that's something that is, it's kind of unique. And as a matter of fact, a plug, right? So this week I'm speaking on the emergence of 5PL, right? And how this discipline of connectivity, a single throat to choke, probably not the most PC thing to say, but one owner for all your supply chain, whether it be purchase order management, execution, planning, rate negotiation, supply chain financing and consignment, all of those things with a single owner and say, hey, we can do that for you. There's economies of scale of doing that, right? And there's a heck of a lot of value and time to market improvement that you can deliver for your customers. DSV IMS is at the forefront of that, at the epicenter of that development. So that intrigued me to help grow and kind of build that model while supporting semiconductor for sure and supporting Intel for sure, but to grow and kind of put the skills that I've seen in practice as a customer, I can put it in practice as a supplier. So that was my motivating factor. And yeah, I guess there was a sprinkling of just a newness, right? Like I had held 11 different roles at Intel in 19 years. So every 18 months or so, I was transitioning, right?
Wow.
So that's what happens. You're on the kind of leadership pipeline and you're moving through and here comes an opportunity. And I had done quite a few of those things at Intel and obviously turbulent time for Intel right now. And the timing made sense. And I was like, man, there's grass isn't always greener, but
Timing.
I did my homework, and it's been really, really fruitful thus far. I've been there about 6 months, and I'm loving it.
Oh,
yeah.
If you don't mind me asking,
Go ahead. Yeah. Open kimono.
If you don't mind me asking, like seeing where Intel is today in comparison to the time where you were at, where it was the hay time and the great times, and how does it make you feel?
That's a tough one. A lot of emotions come up. It makes me feel as if Intel was a bit late to the game with respect to cultural adaptation, really. And I'm trying to mince my words here a little bit because I don't want to be too accusatory, but with all great companies, especially sizable ones that can grow, they come under pressure, right? The competition always comes from the bottom, and only the paranoid survive, and all of the, right here, right? We're in Santa Clara where all this stuff was thought up, right? Yeah. Don't be encumbered by your past. Go out and do something amazing, Robert Noyce, and anyway, all the guys. So Intel was a bit complacent, in my opinion, after their heyday in the 80s, 90s, and early 2000s. Used to the cost plus model, right? Hey, we're just going to design it. Man, it costs a lot of money, but we need to make this margin. We put 60 points on top of it and then go off and sell it. And when you have hundreds of thousands of people, tens of thousands, 100, 120,000, however many thousands of people operating in that environment with that mindset of we just need to get it out and our technology's the best and it'll sell. We just need to get it there. It creates systems and cultural artifacts and, just a general modus operandi that is focused on output and getting the thing to work at any cost. But the reality is that in the 2000s, surely 2000 teens, we were coming under extreme technical competition, mobile, handheld internet computing, right? The iPhone 2006 and since, right? Huge disruptor.
Yeah.
Social media, gigantic disruptor in the 2010s, right? And folks were not requiring the level of compute that Intel was pathfinding. And there was a lot of money spent on a lot of programs at Intel that never sold. And so when I say I feel like the cultural shift at Intel was too late, and to a certain extent didn't even happen yet. I think the new CEO and Lip Bhutan and all, okay, there's a mandate now. You could argue there was one with Pat when he came in, but it's going to take a long time, in my opinion, to shift that culture. They need to get hungry. And so that's what I'm feeling, a mix of emotions. I love the company. You're exactly right. I bleed Intel blue. I still use the term we, right?
Yeah, folks.
We always feel.
They're like, hey, who's we? I was like, they're a customer of ours. Oh, no, kind of, still.
But I'll say I have the utmost respect because I have learned volumes of detail about semiconductor, about just the engineering mindset, the scientific method, like the way that Intel operates. It's phenomenally attractive from a design and development standpoint. And for that reason, I miss it, but they're going through their change.
Yep.
And that they will emerge stronger. And we as consumers of their technology will reap those benefits. So
Sure.
That's how I feel in a long-winded answer. But
Fingers crossed. Yeah, fingers crossed.
it'll happen. It'll happen.
They're important. They're very important. It's so sad to see what's happened to them, right? So I think we were, all of us as a community are praying for their revival, as one would say. But look, you're with DSV now.
Correct. Yeah.
DSV IMS, right?
Yep. Inventory management solution.
Exactly. And of course, this company, of course, they've been a major player for over 20 years, right? With a global network of 4,000 plus suppliers, insane numbers.
Yeah.
Could you give us an overview of the company's core approach to inventory management and supply chain optimization?
Yeah, for sure. So DSV as a corporation, right? Third, fourth largest logistics provider and shipper of goods. We just announced the acquisition of Schenker, DB Schenker, last.
Which puts you at 3 or 2 now?
They were number 4, we were number 3. So
Right.
combined, we'll be number 1 by, don't quote me on this, but double-digit percentages. So at 15 to 20% will be number 1. That's slotted to pass regulatory completion in Q2 of this year and be finalized. So DSV as a whole is as big / soon to be bigger than every other logistics and freight company in the world. So their approach to inventory management and solutions probably looks a little bit different than our specific approach in DSV IMS.
Okay.
I say that because the world runs on DSV Global, right? The container cargo, the air freight, the rail, the truck, all that stuff. So their mantra is to keep the world running through disruptions, through turmoil, through strife, no matter what, keep it running. DSV IMS is very synergistic with that, in that we not only keep the world running, but we keep the world running for our customers and their uniquely complex supply chains, primarily in high capacity utilization, high capital, high tech industry, right? So whether that be semi, air and defense, essentially aero defense, automotive, med tech. So these companies that have large capital footprints, they have a necessity to keep their up to production time, right? So their mean time between failure and so on of their equipment quite well forecasted and expected, and short in duration and long in between, if you will, right? Mean time between failure is very long, and the time to come up to production is very short. In order to do that, you need to be very intelligent about the inventory that you're stocking,
Right.
and not just stock everything in some sort of risk-adverse mindset and have a glut of inventory that's never used, primarily on the manufacturing spares and MRO items. So our approach from DSV IMS is to provide a solution for the customers that say, hey, these are the elements that we bring to bear: digital PO management from, source to settle, procure to pay, plan to manufacture, all those work streams, right? Provide a very turnkey approach to executing those elements so that the customer doesn't have to. It's oftentimes not the customer's core competency, right, and capability to manage a supply chain. They're a tech company, they're a manufacturing company, they have some IP that they're trying to, scale. They don't necessarily know how best to negotiate agreements with material suppliers, or how to run a warehouse and a cross stock, and how to make sure that you're managing your, FIFO versus LIFO, or whatever the case may be. Not only are they not very skilled at it, but they probably don't have a desire to do it, right? And so there's a bunch of people out there that will do those point solutions for you. I need somebody in my warehouse. Okay, cool. I need somebody to do my POs. All right, cool. I need a call center in India to do my IT support. Cool. But there's an emergence of these companies that do all of those elements for you with the turnkey, one PO every month. You pay us the dollar amount based upon the transactions. We can own the inventory for you, consign the inventory, right? Given the fact that it's moving, we have the right stuff. Plan out your materials requirements, source with your suppliers, secure that source of supply so you can depend upon it. Proactively manage the supplier's KPIs, right? And their lead time and on-time delivery and all that kind of stuff. And really execute your supply chain with a turnkey solution that you otherwise aren't doing, or are doing and it's costing too much, or are doing and you don't want to do any longer because you'd like to use your resources somewhere else.
Yeah.
So that's what DSV IMS brings to the table, with an absolute gargantuan network of logistics and freight behind it.
Nice.
So that's where we fit. It's a very cool business. The value proposition is very strong, like I say, on those facets of supply chain financing and ownership, execution, right, and resource management. Honestly, this whole advent of AI and big data is huge, right? So machine learning, how we're doing data mining to go off and say what elements of my consumption, exists in system somewhere in an unstructured manner. It could be in notes that a technician wrote down or some sort of repair order that a supplier got that, alluded to the failure mechanism. All of that data is out there somewhere. And to the extent that we can use these large language models to kind of extract value there and understand what the upcoming requirements are going to be, is the extent to which we can make sure supply is there.
When was this implemented? Do you know when it was implemented? These
specifically?
Well, theoretically, these LLM initiatives in mind.
Gosh, yeah, I would say over the course of the past 3 or 4 years.
Okay.
In pockets, it's really emerging though. I mean, as the
I mean, that's AI, isn't it?
It's an interesting topic because, and by the way, I'm not the foremost authority on this particular topic. I'm a practitioner of it. I use this stuff, right? But the reality is there was such an apprehension about AI and using, Chat GPT when it first came out. It was September. I thought it was September 30th, 2022. I was actually at a conference and a speaker used this date and said, "What were you doing on this date?" And asked the audience, "Do you guys remember?" Like 10 a.m. or something. And it was when ChatGPT went live for the first time where people could go in.
Really? I'm going to use that tomorrow in my presentation.
I think it was. So I think check the date before we say it. We can edit that out.
Who remembers that day?
What were you doing? It's the wrong date. But the reality is if you recall, there was so much apprehension about doing that. Remember even the AI stuff with like your facial recognition? Like, well, I don't want to put my picture in there and then have it make an avatar for me because then, some government regime on the other side of the world might then know who I am. So there's this mental model that folks need to shift around with respect to AI, that it's quote unquote secure, or I'm not going to be exposing myself to undue risk based upon it. And I think that has taken several years for folks to palate. Example, at Intel, when ChatGPT first came out, HR company-wide bulletin.
Really? Wow.
No one uses ChatGPT on any Intel device, nor Intel cell phone or anything.
Wow.
Up to and including termination. No.
Well, that was not the right decision.
Flash forward.
Talk about decision-making problems.
Flash forward 18 months.
Everyone's
Microsoft Copilot. But it's typical with any new disruptive technology to be like, hey, whoa, this is scary. Social media is again, saying like, well, I don't want to put all my stuff out on Facebook. Like, what's going to happen? What's going to have, X or Twitter? And so it takes society a while to adopt.
Isn't there like a moral in that message though? I mean, isn't that where the early adopters always win, they say, right?
Yeah, there's a couple of morals to that. Right? I think there's a really interesting body of work that I would recommend highly to yourself and the viewers. Is a guy by the name of Everett Rogers, and he was a researcher at University of New Mexico. Oddly enough, just happenstance. I didn't know him when I was there, but he wrote a book or a piece of work called "The Diffusions of Innovation." And it talks very specifically about technological innovation and how it's diffused through society in waves. So you've got your innovators, and then your early innovators and your early adopters, your early majority, your late majority, and your laggards, right? And it's this kind of bell curve, right? And he postulated two primary takeaways for management and leadership. First is that only adjacent sections can affect change on adjacent sections. So if you have your innovators here, they can only really affect change on your early adopters. And early adopters can only really affect change on the early majority, and so on. You don't take your innovators and marry them up with the laggards. Be like, go learn from this innovator. And the innovator is like, go tell this guy who has no interest in doing anything that you're doing to do what you're doing. And it doesn't work. So it has to go through this kind of spectrum first. And then secondarily, where leadership focuses its energy can skew that distribution. So if leadership says, hey, we want to have an innovative culture, we're willing to take risks, we're willing to adopt things early, roll with the punches, so to speak, assuming safe and legal and compliant and all that, then folks start to shift toward the early adoption, right? Because it's okay, it's acceptable, right? But the more manager and leadership says, ooh, actually, that's kind of dangerous. Like, oh, I don't know yet. Let's wait and see. Ooh, let's sit on the fence, right? Or
then you have a caution.
Yeah, or hey, these guys aren't doing this, so let's go talk to them and figure out why they're not adopting. Well, hang on, all your innovators are like, I don't really care why they're not adopting. I'm working on the next thing, right? So I think the takeaway, so it's an interesting study of work, but I think the takeaway is twofold. Like, one, yes, there is benefit from a value creation, revenue, profit, market segment share, all that, from being an early adopter and an innovator and fueling that thing quickly. Right. But the second piece is there's a cultural artifact that you have to understand that not everyone is going to be in that early adopter and innovator space. So you've got a majority by distribution in the early and late and laggards. So figuring out how to get them to come along on the journey is, I think that's the challenge.
Marvelous. I want to go back into the perspective of, one of the combinations, which is quite interesting, in terms of your career.
Sure, yeah.
Because DSV IMS was, of course, last year recognized by Intel.
Yes.
With the Intel Epic Distinguished Supplier Award.
That's right.
Could you explain the significance of this award and of course, what sets DSV IMS apart from other suppliers in Intel's vast ecosystem, as one would say?
Yeah. It's a huge honor to have that award. Working in Intel's supply chain, that was what we wanted our suppliers to get, right? Like, if you wanted your supplier that you were managing or your group of suppliers, one or two of them to be an Epic award winner, because it represents so much holistic evaluation from sustainability, financial health, corporate environmental governance, right? Like, hey, what are you doing for social governance? How are you treating your customers? So on. Technology, obviously the performance, right? On-time delivery and all of the quality metrics and so on. So that entire balanced scorecard suite of metrics need to be in place to even be Epic eligible. But then you have to do it year over year over year,
consistent
over year. So just because you did it 1 year doesn't mean, yeah, that's great, you get a gold medal. The Epic program is phenomenally well respected and known throughout semi and high tech. For DSV IMS to win that, it was huge. I mean, it's the only service-based company doing inventory management that's in that a recognition group. I believe out of 7,000 suppliers, only 27 received the Epic Award. I believe that's the right number. Let me just make sure. But it's a couple dozen received it. And it's awesome. It allows us to sure, we can kind of tout it a bit.
Yeah.
But really what it represents is that we've got a quality management system. We've got consistency of results. We make and meet commitments, right? We understand the trajectory of the company and help partner with them to get there. All of the things that you want out of a supplier that's going to help transform your business, right, is what you need to demonstrate to even be Epic eligible. And then a lot of companies that don't get awarded the Epic Award anyway, right? Because it's highly competitive. So it's very cool. I can't tell you how cool it is to have IMS there, especially knowing the backstory of IMS and how it's grown and grassroots and 25 years, like you had mentioned, and 4,000 suppliers and all of that work. Kind of, it's like a figurehead moment.
But why did you specifically? Why did DSV IMS specifically win it in comparison to the other competitors? What do you think was the key criteria that made Intel go, well, these guys?
I think twofold. You have to have the baseline stuff that we just mentioned. Got it, right? So that's performance. If you don't have it, and by the way, any one of those parameters, right? So forced and bonded labor or responsible business alliance or your fill rate wasn't where it needed to be. Any one of those metrics and you're gone.
Okay.
So you have to hit them all. And then you have to get selected and nominated and so on after you meet the baseline. I think 2 reasons why. One, we have grown and scaled with Intel and supported not just fab and PTD, but also ATTD and ATM, also the lab network, and also collaterals and capital equipment items. So everything that Intel was asking from us, we would respond in excellence. And that is something that, in a very turbulent and volatile time, as we've seen over the course of the past 5 or 6 years, obviously it's not changing now. Having a supplier that grows, adapts, transforms, is transparent with you, right, about what we can do and about what needs to be done, I think is key. The second piece is that we have a really strong site presence, and those individuals on the Intel sites work closely with the customer, right? The tool owners, the factory managers, the finance folks, the planning teams, right? So they're meeting with them face to face, building those relationships really as an extension of the customer. And that's what at DSV IMS we want to do with all of our customers, but it obviously depends on the size of the footprint. Intel's huge, but have folks on site, because that high context interaction is stuff that you just can't replicate, right? This isn't, as much as we want to go towards this digital world, here we talk about, scalability and kind of, master data governance and having everything in its hierarchical kind of order. It's very important, but ultimately a high context interaction where you're building relationships, it provides value and qualitative inputs to your overall operation.
Sure.
That is just irreplaceable.
But so talking about irreplaceability then, or replaceability, fast forward the next 10 years.
Okay.
AI is on the next level.
Mm-hmm.
And then you have this physical AI that's in place, and robots come into play.
Boston Dynamics.
Boston Dynamics becomes reality, and they're there at the Intel site. Do you see that happening?
Stuart's Nostradamus hat. I think agentic AI is going to take off. It has taken off already. I think you're going to see that almost everywhere. When I say agentic AI, I'm really talking about deterministic workflows that are like not necessarily prescribed, but there is a known end to all of those flows, right? So if you start here and it's decision tree with 50 branches and there's 45, ends, determined ends. If it's deterministic, if all of these conditions exist, then this, and if all of these ones can, then that. And so if that exists and you can map it out, there's no reason it can't be automated and, artificially intelligized, if you will. That's what you're going to see, I think, first and foremost. Now, as that's applied to a humanoid factor, right? Like, hey, I'm going to have someone walking around that's doing my agentic work. I don't know. That to me, I think there's a big hurdle that needs to be crossed with respect to the cost basis of that robotics and the power management of it, right? So any of these drones is a great example, right? So they're testing drones right now in Arizona. Human, like guy your size, guy my size. We can sit in a chair, a couple of iPads in front of us, and an 8-motor like drone, right? That's the size of this room, and it's above you, and it's got batteries, and you can fly it with a joystick like a Nintendo 64, like you're playing 007 GoldenEye.
Wow,
seriously, like not a flying game, but nonetheless, you can like do it.
Using for delivery purposes,
just individual transportation. Wow. So I bring this up because
it's a helicopter.
it's a video game helicopter. You're sitting in a lawn chair flying around, and the rules of physics still apply, right? 0.6 meters per second squared. How fast do you fall, right, in an unconstrained environment on this planet? So it doesn't matter whether you fall out of a commercial airplane or you fall out of your backyard lawn chair drone, right? Those ramifications are still there.
Right.
And I think I bring that up because those, I'll call them solutions, those capabilities aren't really going to become commercially available until it's made affordable to do that. you have this big old, they cost about 250 grand, by the way, the chair, the lawn chair.
Oh, really?
Yeah,
Okay.
250 grand. And there's people driving around right now with $250,000 McLarens and Maseratis and so on. You can go get one.
Yeah.
Cool. It only flies for like 8 minutes.
Okay.
That's the problem. So here's my agentic AI robot. Even today,
How long can you
it's $200,000. Well, that's, but I never have to pay him. I pay him one time instead of $200,000 a year, right?
Yeah.
Cool. How do you keep the guy powered up?
Powered up, yeah.
Right. So, and then what's the maintenance look like? So that's the hurdle, I think, when you talk about like the AI logic, right? And saying, hey, I can learn, adapt, overcome, seek input, change my deliverables and kind of seek to optimize within these parameters and guardrails that you've set up, right, in my programming. Cool as a system, but if you apply that into a physical humanoid entity, then there's that mechanical aspect that I honestly don't think has been, that hurdle's even been, we haven't even come close to.
And that's a very, very well spotted point. When you hear all these, discussions of, robots are going to take over our jobs. Really? I mean, let's let cars go above 1,000 kilometers in range for us. So let it go to 5,000 first. Fair point.
Yep.
I want to go into your key lessons from Intel.
Please.
In terms of your supply chain expertise and insight. So you've led everything from global planning of assembly materials to sourcing and business intelligence systems.
Yeah.
What fundamental lessons from your Intel career are you now applying at DSV IMS?
All the good ones and none of the bad ones.
It's a good answer. It's short and simple.
So, a couple of things come to mind. Intel, it doesn't sound really corny. Intel legitimately cares. And that is something that I did not expect out of a Fortune 50, Fortune 100 company. Like, legitimately cares about their people, about their customers, about their products, about what they're doing to the environment. It's awesome. And I think that painted a foundation for me that I wasn't expecting. And I didn't even really realize until I left how core that principle was to me. Like, if you're not doing things in the right way, why do them at all? Right? And Intel does that in spades unilaterally, regardless of what they're sourcing in the supply chain. So that was an underpinning of, we're not going to select a supplier just because they're the cheapest when they're doing things that we don't align with, or, they're making shady deals, or they've got some, back channel into government somewhere. No, I don't care if it's cheaper. Not going to happen. Right. We're not going to go off and hold a supplier accountable to, executing to something when we know that they're not going to be able to do it, and we're just going to remediate them into bankruptcy. By the way, that's happened. Lots of proven cases, right? Where, hey, this is the term, you signed the agreement, I'm going to hold you accountable or else I'm going to sue you. And they're like, well, we can't do that fundamentally. So congratulations on your excellent negotiation, but you now have a legally binding contract that's inactionable by us. And, oh, by the way, you're responsible for us to deliver this. And if we don't, then you're going to fail as well. Right. So you're really an extension of your supplier's ability to deliver. Right. So that sort of holistic type mentality was huge for me. I did not expect that. Didn't learn that in school. There's a kind of a moral based underpinning, if you will, of life, I guess, that some people have, some don't, but that you kind of understand. You try to treat people right and do that kind of thing. But they don't really, at least when I was in school, they didn't really teach you that as a discipline. So Intel has that in spades, and it's very cool. So again, I realize that sounds a little bit cliche, but that's something that sticks with me. I think another piece is the visibility across I'll say silos or kind of sites at Intel factories, and understanding that sub-optimization of those individual nodes is at the detriment of the total, right? So this total systems approach, right? You never optimize a subsystem at the detriment of the total system, right? Academically, that's the total systems approach. So Intel was very, very good at that in the past 10 to 15 years. When I first started, not so much, lots of site-based silos, lots of I'm doing it this way and I'm not talking to anybody else. And we broke a lot of that down. And those are principles that I think hold true now more than ever in our DSV IMS days, because as we're growing our customer base, as we're growing our footprint of suppliers, being able to visualize what folks are doing, how they're doing it, what those best practices are, how we can implement that, and having that total systems approach is really eye-opening. And I find that is a differentiating factor for us. I think that there's still a lot of folks that are seeking point solutions and seeking, whether it be that next promotion that they're vying for, or whether it be the year-end, close that's coming up in 4 months and we need to figure out a way to balloon cruise it over the line. I mean, the folks are doing this stuff, right? That's something I learned at Intel is a really short-sighted mentality that's ineffective. And I think one of the last things from a supply chain management aspect with Intel is relationships. I mentioned it before, are paramount. And obviously treating people right and caring and having the visibility I just talked about, but also understanding that your supply network is really an extension of you.
Right.
And it's not us versus them, right? It's us versus the competitors. Intel had this great, we're talking about Intel, what you take away, right? Intel had this great slogan that they put up on the walls that said, collaborate inside, compete outside. And there is so much simplicity and validity to that, because when you're involved with so many intelligent, driven, type A, alpha engineering type people, you tend to want to, well, I can do this better than you, and I can articulate that better, or I can solve that better, mine's faster, or I designed this way and you were doing the other way and this one works better. But that competition, while it's healthy for developmental purposes and that innovator early adopter kind of thing, it's not necessarily helpful to be competing with your colleagues at the detriment of your company. And the same holds true with supplier relationships. Now, we need to get something out of the supplier. They need to get something out of us. But as I approach a supplier, and now as I'm approaching a customer, right, as a provisioner of 5PL, like we're talking about in my current role, I need to make money.
Sure.
They need to make money. They need to have value out of the thing, right? I can't just, for lack of a better term, fleece their pockets and think that it's sustainable or that they're not going to realize. And then they can't just gaslight me and what my financials are and say, well, Stuart, I need you to do it for half your cost. Why am I going to do that? I'm not.
Yeah.
So at the center of all that isn't negotiating tactics and beating on the table and, quantifiable value matrices and all kinds of cool stuff that you get finance folks to dial in on. It's relationships. It's the reality that you're doing your gig, I'm doing my gig. You might not necessarily need me and I don't necessarily need you. But the reality is that together, if we are aligned, directionally, there can be synergy and we can both be stronger together.
Mm-hmm.
And so that mentality of just general sourcing and, influence and stakeholder management across the company lines is something that I've taken from Intel. And I think in some areas we did that very, very well at Intel. There's the we again. In some areas it wasn't done very well at all. And it was a 800-pound gorilla, do what I tell you because, or else. And that mentality just doesn't really work anymore. And you're seeing that with some of Intel's competitors as well, right? Where they're burning through folks. You're seeing attrition inside of some of these, companies that are in the foundry space where, they're asking their people to work 12, 14 hours a day and, be around the clock availability. And folks are just like, whoa, hang on, this isn't, I can't do this, right? I can't do it forever. And so I think there's somewhat of a reckoning to happen in the workforce.
Do you think that it's I've always heard through the supplier ecosystem that Intel's notorious for red tape, a lot of red tape. Is that the cause of supply chain, or is it the cause of the procurement department? Or is it the legal department?
I would say it's one step further.
Okay.
I think it's the tenet of the technology and intellectual property. which then leads to legal, which then leads to bureaucratic structure of process.
Okay.
There were a couple of things that Intel did that were stifling that folks always questioned out in the industry. One of the red tapes you're probably talking about is copy exactly.
Right.
Right. So CE exclamation point. Right? It's got to be exclaimed. It was very important in the times where manufacturing yield was pretty low. There were long throughput times of manufacturing with multiple different fabs all building the same process technology. So say you had 2,000 steps in this particular silicon process technology, maybe it's 8-inch, like 86X or something like that, whatever, 8X. There's a lot of different process, but regardless, it might be running at 3 or 4 different fabs. Say there's 2,000 process steps. The copy exactly thing said, hey, I can literally unplug that entire lot from step 1,000, ship it to another factory, plug it in at step 1,001 and run it and have no impact to yield, as if it was literally running in the same factory and never made the physical move. That was the real benefit behind CE, was to create a virtual factory that had flexibility of WIP and consistency of quality throughout. Flash forward, you've got mega fabs now that are able to build an entire process technology and all the volume that's required because the process life cycle's shorter, right? 12 to 18 months. Fabs are bigger. Density is tighter. Wafers are bigger, right? All of these things. You don't need 5 fabs running the same process technology.
Right.
So do I really need copy exactly? And does copy exact, when does it not hold true anymore? And so that's a big one that you're probably talking about with respect to red tape and like,
Right.
Why does it need to be the same exact form, fit, and function broom that it just sweeps the stuff the same way that the other one does, right? I mean, so there's some of those, I'll say steadfast rules that didn't really pass the sniff test. Again, once margins started getting compressed, or like, hey, how much is copy exactly actually costing us, and where do we actually need it versus where is it a nice to have? And that's one. And I think the other piece, the Intel kind of bureaucratic aspect, is founded around the fact that we had a target on our back. Everybody was. I mean,
KPI'd.
Yeah, when you're at the front of the pack, everybody's coming after you, right? So keep us out of court, right? Make sure that everything's legit and structured. But I will tell you, just like it was foreshadowed by our previous Intel leadership, competition always comes from the bottom. And that's what you saw with some of the technology, right? And missing mobile, and then AI, and
yeah. I mean, you mentioned 2 key things in terms of digital tools, of course, AI and predictive analysis.
Yeah.
Have you seen, or do you expect blockchain to play a role in this?
100%.
Okay.
Yeah.
Could you, from modern, for modern semiconductor supply chains,
Mm-hmm.
where do you see that being implemented?
So, kind of all over. I think in the ERP space, it's probably most prolific there. Transaction and financial reporting. One of the cool things about our digitization this journey that DSV IMS is going on, and how we're able to provide these solutions to folks, we're using industry best practices. So people that are really, really good at designing and developing and deploying ERP systems, they're using blockchain right now to, secure and protect their transactional data. Again, focus on your core competency, outsource everything else. Core competency of DSV IMS is not creating blockchain solutions in ERP, but there is somebody out there who does that. So why don't I go partner with them, build that relationship, and grow that business? So that's what we've been doing, specifically I say ERP because that's the most front of mind example that I have. But your financial transactions with suppliers, accounts payable, accounts receivable, all of the, the supply chain financing that we have, all those transactions with respect to here's the incoming PO, here's who takes ownership of it, here's the dollar value of it, here's the Incoterms and the duration of time that we have to pay. All of those transaction and data bits are all visible to everybody in that ecosystem that needs to see it. That's the cool aspect of blockchain, is that you can't hide, right?
Yeah.
Everything's above board, right? And protected and secured, and it's visible. So there's no ambiguity to your suppliers or to your customers. And so that's been a strength comes in that we've seen.
Do you see, I mean, I presume one of the questions that you get asked by your potential target customers is, what are the best practices or frameworks do you recommend for companies that are aiming to transform their supply chain from cost centers into strategic assets?
Yeah, I think there's a couple of things. If I had a whiteboard, we've just met, but I love drawing on whiteboards. You probably don't want me drawing on the
Venn diagrams. That's your engineer, right? The engineering side of it.
That's right. What are the commonalities, the unisons? So I think first, if you want to transform from being a cost center to be a value enabler, couple of ways. Time to market is huge, right? So don't stand in the way of that. Understanding the upcoming technology life cycles, the new product introduction schedules, all of that stuff is very, very important in preparing for that, right? So that comes into planning and understanding your future requirements and establishing your supply and provisions to satisfy those requirements. But then the question is, well, how do you do that, right? If you don't know what's coming, how do you prepare for it? And I'll say the first thing is the old adage, right? Ye who lives in a glass house trying to throw stones or whatever it is, right? Clean up your own backyard. You've got inventory that you're currently satisfying, or you're currently holding to satisfy your requirements. Is it optimized? What are your turns there, right? What obsolescence risks do you have? What are the payment terms that you have with those suppliers, right? Is there benefit to be realized there by pushing out some of those durations or getting net discounts? What are they motivated by? When's the last time you negotiated any of those pricing agreements? Who knows, right? Do you have assurances of supply in case that there's an upside, right? Or memorandums of understanding to say, hey, I'm going to buy between 800 and 1.2 million of these things this year. And can you assure that? Those sorts of tactics on your current scope, I think cleans that up a lot. Oftentimes supply chain is seen as just literally a utility, like your power company. You go home and you flip the switch, you expect the lights to come on. Mm-hmm. You do that 10 years in a row, it's 3,600 days, lights always come on. The one day you flip the switch and the lights don't come on, you jump up and down screaming, you call the power company, like, what the hell, you guys left me out to dry, blah, blah, blah. It's like, well, what about the other 3,800 times that I did it and it was no problem, right? You forget about that quickly. That's what supply chain is like, except for you've got 150,000 SKUs that you're stocking. So you can have 149,995 of them, and the 5 that you're short on can be the ones that you fail. So being able to understand like the, how best to say, the fact that supply chain isn't a utility, that you can't just flip the switch and expect it to come on at no cost. There's a cost associated with that. Start to break that stuff down and say, hey, truly, what is it that I need versus a nice to have? What are my alternate sourcing options? Where can I stage it? So that's first. And then I think secondarily, it gets into that predictive analysis. What are the future requirements? What's coming up, right? And what elements do we see in the market with the demand drivers that there are, with technology intercepts that we can get ahead of and prepare the customer for whatever their future requirements are. I think that is how, if you think about supply chain as a discipline, gets out of being an execution cost center, right? As in, go complete my POs and make sure that I have stock in the warehouse, to, hey, I'm going to go generate value because I can say yes to that customer. That's, a transformative technology, or it's a transformative venture into a new market segment share, whatever the case may be. I can say yes because I already have the suppliers on board to do that. I've already built the relationship with my supply network to be able to confidently say I can service that agreement. those are ways that the supply chain can come to the table and say, I'm enabling revenue, as opposed to just, keeping the lights on, if you will. Both are important, obviously. And by the way, you can't be out there enabling revenue when your factory's dark because you have any power, right? So there's a certain amount, like baseline operation. So I'm saying clean up your own house first, right? And there's a lot of margin to be had there, quite frankly. And if you don't know how to clean up your own house, guess what? DSV IMS does that very, very well, right? And so we've got the systems and we've got the solutions to do that. Right. And so that's where we're seeing a lot of value because folks just really don't have
the time
and the willingness to learn, right? I mean, you take there's one customer that we're looking at that's a high-tech device manufacturer. I guess I'll just kind of leave it at that. Very sophisticated bill of materials, 40,000 different parts, right? And there's tons of nuts and bolts on this thing. It's large assembly. And the nuts and bolts on this thing are pretty expensive. And they're pretty standard. And they're currently, just being evaluated based upon as needed basis, best we can tell. We buy what we need from who can provide it at the time. And then when we are about to run out, we go buy some more. And it's like, well, is that really working for you? Like, how much what are your turns? How susceptible are you to worldwide commodity pricing? What happens on these nuts and bolts if you can't get them anymore? And now, it's not exactly a strategic enabler of your product, but if you can't bolt the thing together, then that's pretty important. So there's, when you start having those discussions with targets, potential customers, they're like, well, yeah, we've never really even thought about that. Like, okay, well, how much money is it? Well, we don't really have that summarized. I'm like, well, let's see your cost of goods sold. Well, yeah, it's just one line item that says 10% in hardware. It's like, well, what's comprised? What if we saved 50% of that, right? And your net profit's 20%. It all of a sudden goes up to 35. And you got a 25% pop in net profit from a 50% reduction in your nuts and bolts. Those kinds of discussions are like, wow. So that's how the strategic value creation can happen from supply chain management that I've seen. A couple of reasons.
What's actually interesting is your current title is Director of Special Projects.
That's right.
Could you expand on what types of special initiatives or special cross-functional programs that you're overseeing with DSV IMS?
For sure. It's funny. It's kind of clandestine, if you will, special projects, but
it's like special forces, right?
Something like this. Yeah, I'd have to kill you if I told you. No, several. First and foremost, we are taking our on-premise planning systems and processes and moving to a cloud-based solution for aggregating demand and supply and optimizing inventory, leveraging AI and blockchain throughout that. So that is a huge project that we're currently embarking on, have embarked on, we're well underway. So leading that initiative across all of our customers, both current and future, all of our demand requirements, including, resource requirements and financings and all of that stuff. So that's a pretty big one. But additionally, trying to really present DSV IMS to customers and help them understand the value of integrated supply chain management. Just like we've been talking about, this is a great example, a great way to do that, hopefully, right? So while that might not be a special project that I'm quote unquote leading, that's something that the leadership of our team is really excited about, because almost everyone we talk to has heard of this sort of approach, or hasn't heard of it, or hasn't seen the benefit from it. And they're all struggling with the same stuff, which is like, hey, I've got too many people doing POs. I've got too many people doing transactions. I've got too many people chasing after this and that. It's not worth my time. My suppliers suck. I wish I had another source. I have to deal with them. those sorts of things. I wish I had better networking capital, right? Like my money's all tied up in stuff that I need to have, even though I can't get rid of it, right? So that's another vector that that my leadership team has been working on is kind of positioning that value proposition out in the market. And then lastly is our master data management and how we govern and ensure quality of master data throughout all of our customers. It's a very interesting notion. It's kind of the foundation, if you will, upon which you build your supply chain house. And that master data is very, very challenging to navigate. Just surmise it to say that if you don't have the right structure and governance over how you're housing, storing, aggregating, quantifying your data, whether that be part number level data, machine type, level data to say, hey, this is what this part's used on. Bill of material type, parent-child relationship, right? For every tabletop, I need 4 table legs and I need 8 dowels and that kind of stuff, right? That relational type. Or whether it be consumption-based, right? Like, hey, this is how this element behaves. Every time that I don't know, good example. Every time I do an oil change, I need 8 quarts of oil and an oil filter and an oil drain plug gasket, right? Those work together. I don't ever need an oil drain plug gasket when I'm not changing my oil. Why would I take that off, right? So those sorts of things, structuring the data in such a way that you can fundamentally, and we're not talking about 3 line items, we're talking hundreds of thousands of line items, right? So it's very complex, and then each line item might have 200 attributes about it. So you get this very large data set, and being able to make sure that it's structured and from a taxonomy standpoint, established in such a way that it makes logical sense for these big data algorithms to go look at, and predictive analysis, tools to go look at and make sense of it. So it's not garbage in, garbage out. So that's, we've been doing this for a long time already, but with all the new customers onboarding of that, it's very, very important. So that's another thing that we're leading.
And then, of course, one key thing that, of course, caught my attention during the research is also not only is it industrial applications or collaborations, industrial collaborations, but also there seems to be a desire with educational partnerships, right? So, you guys have collaborated with Arizona State University and APICS, APICS, for supply chain education and improvement. What was the driver behind this? What was the motivation behind this?
A couple of things. So APICS, the Association for Operations Management, does professional certifications on supply chain, and I had been personally involved with APICS as well as professionally since I was in college.
Oh wow!
Helped design the CSCMP, or excuse me, not the CSCMP, the CSCP. I'm getting all of my C's and S's mixed up. The CSCP, the Certified Supply Chain Planner curriculum, which replaced the CPIM and CIRM. Regardless, those are the legacy APICS one. But suffice it to say that the APICS body of knowledge is important and near and dear to me, as well as many of my colleagues at DSV and at Intel, because it provides a structured, regimented approach to what supply chain is, what the value drivers are, how you quantify them, how you apply them in practice. And a lot of folks, again, don't have that core competency from their schooling or what have you. They get in industry, they need to learn these things. What do you mean about inventory optimization? What is an economic order quantity? What do you mean by holding cost? Like, that doesn't make any sense to me, right? So teaching those principles is very important, and having a baseline vernacular to do that. So APICS is very, very good at that. That's why that's my background there. And since I've been involved with them for so long, I wanted to share that with you. Specifically as it pertains to Arizona State University, our DSV IMS headquarters is here well, not here, but it's in the United States in Mesa, Arizona, just right down the street from ASU. We recruit heavily out of ASU, as does Intel. ASU has one of the best supply chain programs in the nation, and they are very interested in getting industry input and having industry, sharing and coursework in their degree programs. They have an executive MBA, they have a full-time MBA, and they have a bunch of virtual undergrad stuff as well. So they bring in experts from the industry to speak, to do case studies. So we've done case studies with ASU. We hire interns, and there's all sorts of different engagement kind of methods there. So I would say our motivation is twofold. One, to seek out and retain and land good talent, right? Which is a self-serving motivation, but nonetheless. But also to help the curriculum and help bring in the next generation leaders. And that's something that, Michael Crow and president of ASU and what they're doing with the GPEC. I think we're going to be there, later this year, but the Greater Phoenix Economic Council and Chris Camacho and those guys are they're doing phenomenal work.
Absolutely.
And ASU is I think they have the largest enrollment of any university in the country.
Really? Wow.
Sure. Fact check me on that one.
Must be the weather.
And there's a lot of virtual though too. Yeah, it's probably, but there's a lot of virtual as well. So we would almost be like remiss if we weren't there. And I'll just kind of tie that one up and say, the faculty at ASU, supply chain management department chair Goki and the previous chairs, John Fowler and like Professor Rogers and Professor Kelso, and these guys, they have a passion for the professional experience. They themselves were working in supply chain or in industry and business out there as, leaders and VPs and jet setters. And then they're imparting that wisdom along with the academic principles upon their students. And so they seek to, my experience with the faculty is that they seek to continue the, inclusion or absorption of fresh ideas from industry into their curriculum. And so they're asking for it. We're excited about it. We get to see good talent. We get to hire that talent.
So win-win situation.
Right. Factor relationships.
Amen. Yeah. So evolving and looking at future outlook and trends from reshoring to increased automation. Of course, the semiconductor supply chain is undergoing rapid change.
That's right.
Which emerging trends do you believe will have the most significant impact in the next 3 to 5 years?
Most significant impact as it pertains to reshoring and
increased automation.
Increased automation. So let's go geographic first. Nearshoring, onshoring, reshoring. It's all about the shores. It only makes sense from a business continuity standpoint because the geopolitical tensions are not going away anytime soon.
Sure.
And you can see it in Gartner. You can see it in any number of industry kind of publications. You can't have all your eggs in one basket. That aligned with the demand shift is, I think, something that folks really weren't largely unilaterally comprehending. Like Latin America is a pretty large growing target market.
Right.
India is a pretty large growing target market.
Yep.
China isn't growing as fast or being as prevalent in the next 10 to 20 years as they were forecasted to be even 5 years ago. In the United States, obviously the tariff stuff that's happening right now, whether you like it or not, it is changing the paradigm and the ecosystem. And one thing that I've realized about supply chain throughout the years is that you adapt or you die, right? They're going to get someone's going to take that business that has adapted, right? And has not necessarily assimilated, but has understood how to be flexible and nimble and agile, right? And so I think what you're going to see is a lot more of the nearshoring stuff. It might not necessarily be onshoring. I'm not saying that we're going to be building flat panel TVs in the Bay Area here, paying people $150,000 to put in power supplies. Yeah. I don't know that that's going to happen. I don't think it's going to happen. But I think relationships with low to medium cost geos that are in close proximity or immediately adjacent and have similar political views to target markets are going to make a lot of sense. So that can be Indochina with Asia, or with India. It could be Central America, Costa Rica, Panama, with northern South America, and Brazil and such. I'm not exactly sure what the actual political landscape is as far as incentives and infrastructure and this kind of thing, but I'm certain that these governments are hungry and seeing the writing on the wall. I mean, just look at what's happening in Costa Rica, right? I mean, they're blowing up, and then it's a seed stock kind of snowball effect, right? So you get these folks in, companies come in, more companies come in, suppliers come in, more talent comes in. There's a larger talent pool, and it grows, right? So there's going to be much more of that. Now, I'll say, what does that mean for us? It means that we've got more supplier locations, more customer locations, more logistical channels, and more complexity of the supply chain that needs to be automated and systematized, right? So that's that piece on the geographic. That's not going away. I think you'd be foolish to think that we're just going to make it in China and ship it everywhere from Shenzhen. It's not happening. In my opinion, it's not happening. It's not going to be like that forever, I guess is my point. There's going to be other places, other Shenzhens, so to speak. Now, as far as automation goes, I think semiconductors probably, we're speaking to a semiconductor audience here, right? So the level of automation in semiconductor manufacturing is already extraordinarily high. Yeah. Right. Whether you're talking about autonomous overhead vehicle, distribution AMHS systems, or whether you're talking about inside the chamber and those kinds of robotics, or advanced placement, or, JEDEC trays traveling down the line. That level of automation is already pretty high. I think what you're going to see is a level of automation in the logistics side that will blow your mind. Yeah. And I should say it more strongly than what I think you'll see. What you will see in the very near future is a shift of resources inside of our warehouses that you just haven't seen before. I'll give you some examples, right? So we have this facility in Texas. DSV has this facility in Texas called Big Tex, and it's 2.1 million square feet of warehouse space, 1.1 and then 1 in these two kind of immediately adjacent buildings. Huge. Taking hours to walk around, right? And pallet racking to the ceiling and so on and so forth. They have drones that
inside.
Really? Wow. Fully automated.
Wow.
And they go around and they check pallet positions to see what's where.
Wow.
Now, they're not doing lock control, right? They're not looking, hey, is that tape, affixed in the right location? They're not doing that stuff, but they're doing, gross motor movements to say, is this pallet yes, is this pallet no? And literally, drone can fly and image all this stuff, bring that back, load it, and you've got real-time kind of Cypress County inventory positions. You've also got all of the in-transit tracking elements, right? So maybe not automation, but the data collection aspect of this and the connected things, Internet of Things, right? Yeah. Everything's connected, that edge computing. That technology is remarkably affordable right now. And if you have the infrastructure to integrate that into your supply chain, it can be a huge value proposition for you. If you can go, hey, here's where all of my containers are. Here's what's inside all those containers. Here's what its current telemetry is. Here's its barometric pressure and humidity and so on and so forth. Now, not everything needs the white glove service, but those capabilities are out there with an IoT device that has the battery life easily long enough to sustain any sort of, ocean going transit across the world. And you can integrate all of that data and have real-time analytics on it, getting to your ability to say yes, and getting to the supply chain's ability to drive value and revenue creation because we know it's going to be here. Not well, it started its journey from China 89 days ago and it was supposed to take 90 days. So it'll be here tomorrow. Go tell them yes. It's like, well, is it really? Hell, it could be out in the middle of the Pacific Ocean still. Yeah, but they told us 90 days and it's one more day and it'll be here. And you're like looking out on the horizon and it's not there. You know what I mean? So having that level of visibility into the supply chain is coming from technology, and integrating that technology, I think, is really where you're going to see a lot of transformative value. And in the logistics space, I'll say automated trucking is huge.
Yeah.
The last mile delivery, automated there, right? So with the Amazon drones, whether that be that autonomous vehicles dropping the stuff off at your curb. I don't know if you've seen them at ASU or not, but you'll see them when you're there later this year. They have automated delivery bots that are like driving down the road.
Wow.
And they're in the bike lane, but they're the size of an ottoman or something like this. And it's just going down the road in the bike lane. And I presume it will get out of your way if you want to pass it or if you stop in front of it. I don't know. But that's happening today. And it's going to be much more prolific, I think, in the very near future, which again is creating more data and more cloud-based server storage and so on that we need.
It's a whole cycle, right? Cycle of life.
It really is. Why not semi? That's where we started. Right?
Exactly. Thank you for all the insights. I want to wrap up the podcast interview with you, with regards to tips for aspiring individuals coming into the semiconductor logistics world.
Okay.
Drawing on your nearly 2 decades at Intel and now your new experiences with DSV IMS, what advice would you offer to upcoming supply chain professionals in semiconductor manufacturing looking to excel in our industry?
Great question. The things that I would tell myself 20 years ago or plus when I started, seek to understand, like actually care about the why. That matters. It's a pain. It's laborious. But understanding why folks are asking you to do things or folks are acting in a particular manner or why isn't this already done? There could very well be a reason for that. Not saying it's right or wrong, but just blindly, avoiding the why and seeking to understand is something that I see with hungry and aspiring folks all the time. We need to do it this way. Okay, I understand that that's a way, but have you thought about all of the momentum that exists in this ecosystem that you just plopped yourself into as a recent college graduate? You need to change it. Okay, seek to understand. Because the more you seek to understand, the more you'll jump into the second bit, which is the relationship. So building meaningful relationships with your stakeholders in supply chain is what it's all about. Semiconductor is full of highly technical, highly intelligent, and educated individuals that have narrow scope and tons of depth. And as you're a supply chain professional coming into that, or ancillary or finance or IT or whatever the case may be, but supply chain is my experience. Being able to connect and relate and build, meaningful channels of communication and rapport with your stakeholders, with your engineers, with your manufacturing folks, with your suppliers is the single most important thing you can do. And that comes from empathy, putting yourself in their shoes, again, seeking to understand where they're coming from, but also having the ability to articulate yourself in such a way that's not ignorant, but also not inflammatory, right?
Yes.
And that I think is challenging for a lot of today's quote unquote youth, right? I'm not that old, but whatever. I'm just saying folks that are coming out today that have been raised in this kind of digital world, the conversational aspects of their vocabulary and reading micro inequities and reading body language and reading inflection and tone. It's just not, let's make broad statements, but tends to not be as well developed or as robust as in previous generations. And I think that is a huge aspect, is being able to communicate across those cultural boundaries, across those technical, professional boundaries, and with that underpinning of, I'm here because I'm seeking to understand and ask why. I mean, the 5 whys, that's what everybody will tell you. Well, why is this? And then why? And then why? And then why? It's just that mentality will resonate surely in the semi industry. And I think the last thing is to be one of those early adopters.
Yep.
You know, I don't, and again, it sounds kind of cliche, but the world is changing faster than we can even forecast. It's like logarithmically quick, right?
Mm-hmm.
And if you look at just the disruptions that have happened, I mentioned a couple of them, but if you look at the disruptions that have happened in like the 1980s with the personal computer, the 1990s, right, with the internet, the 2000s with mobile internet computing, and like, hey, you actually kind of have a laptop and then you have a phone, like say 2006, 2010s when social media came out and people were like, hey, I can post whatever I want and everybody can see it. What's happening in the 2020s? I ask you, what do you think that disruption is in the 2020s? What do you think?
2020s was, well, mobile phones, isn't it?
No, the one that's happening right now.
And now, sorry,
2020.
sorry, I forgot we mentioned the previous decade. To AI, isn't it?
Boom.
Yeah.
Boom. So here it is, 2025.
Yeah.
And we're like, again, Chat GPT will just have it on. I'll be listening to you tomorrow on the 5th of April. But I think it was the 30th of September 2022, but whatever.
Okay.
That just recently came out. That's a disruptor. These disruptors they have been having our entire life.
Yeah.
And figuring out how to adopt and synergize and integrate those technologies into your day-to-day will enable you to build those relationships faster and really grow your career faster. That would be my advice to the up-and-coming ambitious individuals. That is all predicated on baseline level of competence, education, analytical aptitude, communication skills, verbal and written, all the things that you need to have. But those X factor pieces, seek to understand, like really care because you care to care, not because you think it's some short-term goal. You really have to care. And then, you really have to realize that without relationships and without being able to communicate across these, like, there's going to be people that you have absolutely nothing in common with, that you need to talk with for hours a day on heated, topics that are highly detailed that you're probably not an expert on.
Yeah.
And they're supposed to trust your opinion on one vector instead of just steamrolling you. Like, you have to figure out how to gain credibility and rapport with them. And then lastly, bring forth those early adoption capabilities that differentiate you from the pack. Because you can be like, well, case in point, Intel ChatGPT, not going to be on any Intel device. I don't care. No, we'll fire you. Flash forward a year. Just kidding. It's pretty powerful. Everybody should be using it. You know what I mean? So I'll leave you with this one quote. It's one of my favorites. This gentleman by the name of E.O. Wilson. He was a studier of human behavior and insects as well, and just a crazy academic guy, really, really bright, but talking about how people interact with one another. And he said in a book that he published in 1998, he said, the world is drowning in data while starving for wisdom. Wow. He said, henceforth, the world will be run by synthesizers. And those folks are the ones that can extract meaningful observations and make meaningful connections from the sea of data and bring forth valuable business recommendations. Now, paraphrasing a bit, go check out the quote. E.O. Wilson. It'll be in my speech as well later this week. But I think there's so much value in that, because this is in 1998. I mean, were we really drowning in stuff in 1998 comparative to what we are now? Absolutely not. But how profound it is, because we are starving for wisdom. How do you make sense out of the sea of data, right? Well, we go pay somebody to do it. Go hire a DSV IMS to do it. Sure. But the reality is that those synthesizers, those folks that can look out and see the world of stuff and say, what am I trying to solve today? Because I sought to understand and I have the baseline capability. And what can I grab out of there? And how can I make sense of it and collate it in such a way that I can bring forth a recommendation that adds value and is unique? Those are the folks that are going to take over. And that's who that's how I would be thinking about it. That's how I think about my own career. If I was a younger and just as aspiring individual as I am now, that's what I would be doing as well.
Awesome. So I have a tradition that happens on the podcast. The last person leaves a question for the next person. So the question that was left for you, Stuart, was,
Okay.
So the question that was left for you is, how is the tariffs going to impact you personally, to your company, and to the society around you?
More grunt style shirts printed in the U.S. That's a good one. Personally, you need to. Is this part of the tradition? I get to know who asked this, so I can go find them.
Yeah, you can. After the show.
Is this chronological? No, I think personally, it's going to hit everybody in the wallet in the short term. Like this, it's inevitable. Companies are going to pass on the increased cost of goods sold onto the consumers. It's going to suck. I personally don't think that it's going to be that protracted. The notion that our counterparts in the worldwide stage don't need us is a fallacy. They do. They not only need our money, but they need our military superiority. They need our economic, just sheer size and GDP, irrespective of the trade deficit. They need our innovation, right? They need our relationship building and kind of coming across the aisle. They need all those things. So it's going to be a standoff for the next 10 years, and we're never going to be able to get apart from China unless it's, marked up to 1,000%. I don't think that's really going to come to pass. So I think in the short term, it's going to be painful. I think, which is probably a little bit of a different perspective, is that there's going to be a huge decrease in demand for complex mechanical goods that have elements that are sourced out of China, primarily like, cars, motorcycles, equipment, generators, tractors, like this kind of stuff. People just aren't going to buy them.
Right.
There's not. I mean, if you've got a John Deere tractor or something that's, $200,000 and then, hey, a 25% tariff and half the stuff, so 100,000 of it's going to get taxed, so it's an extra 25 grand on top. The guy who's going to go buy the tractor and just got the loan today for 200 grand isn't going to go cough up another 25 grand tomorrow just because somebody said. Now, if he absolutely needs a tractor, then maybe, but it's going to change his behavior.
Right.
So it's going to shape that demand. But the demand doesn't necessarily go away, right?
People still need tractors.
Correct. So it's just going to be delayed, right? So it's going to create some lumpiness in demand and irregularity of what is aggregated as like consumer confidence and what consumers are buying, just because they're going to ride out the wave a little bit, right? And as you would expect, this is part of the strategy, in my opinion. So I think personally, that's what's going to go on. People are just going to kind of tighten up a bit and kind of breathe in and just hold it for a second, see what's going on. That's what I'm expecting. People are still going to need cars and TVs and that kind of stuff. And I think they'll just have to, take it, which is going to suck a little bit from a disposable income standpoint. But I think it's going to shift our behavior with respect to, looking at where things are from.
Right.
And that's going to be an eye opener for folks. I hope. So personally, that's what I think. Professionally, business is booming. What are we talking about? I mean, it's challenging to navigate these things. And what you need is a trusted partner to help you do that. Right. The better that you can granulate your demand and understand, what the true requirements are, where you can push these things out, the more intelligence you have from that sea of data that you're drowning in, right? The more successful you'll be.
Right.
And so from a business standpoint, us being a provisioner of 5PL and this kind of analytical, digitized ecosystem that turnkey and support your supply chain, that's exactly what folks need, because they're like, hey, I was barely holding it together when things were stable. And now all of a sudden I can't get my parts, or it's going to cost me 25% more, or the stuff's caught up because of a port strike, or whatever the case may be, right?
Yeah.
I think it's going to increase the exposure and the importance and understanding of supply chain optimization and so on. So I think from a professional standpoint, that's really how we see it. It's not, I don't say it's a good thing, but it's going to drive up an awareness for the work that we're doing and the value that can come out of it. Societally, I think was the last one.
Correct.
I mean, here's the deal. I don't know how else to say it. We cannot have a trade deficit of trillions of dollars in this country.
Yeah.
It's fundamentally, we're exposing ourselves to all kinds of risk and all kind of dependence on folks that don't have a similar view of the world.
Right.
And this isn't just about how to govern and God-given rights and freedom versus and communism versus capitalism. And sure, you can kind of digress into that. And people have been studying it for a long time. Okay. And this is the first, representative republic that, has been as long-standing as it has in the history of mankind. We'll see. Time will tell. But I will tell you fundamentally from my perspective, economically, we cannot be a consumption society. We have to build stuff and we have to be able to work on stuff. And that is, I think, starting to come to reality right now, but it was lost in the 90s and 2000s and 2010s, where people weren't going to trade schools. People weren't learning how to use a crosscut saw in their backyard. People weren't, changing oil or changing a tire or even know where the battery is to jumpstart their car. Like, literally, our society has become so specialized that we just think that there's a guy out there for everything. I need something. I go to the supermarket, go to this guy, go to that guy, I call this thing. I have Uber Eats deliver the food to my house. It's like, what are we even doing? Like, how are you affording to do this? Well, somebody's paying me a ton of money. Well, okay, but what are you doing? Well, I'm, answering phone calls from this guy to route it to that guy to get this piece of, well, why can't they just send the information? It's like Office Space, right? Like, you take the papers from the engineers to the customers, right? Why can't they do it themselves? And he's like, because I'm good at dealing with people. But at some point, we as a society, getting back to the United States, right, we have to figure out that, like, you can't rely on other countries and other economies to satisfy your every need at a scalable level, because at some point, you yourself are not needed. Because then your value proposition is just consuming their stuff. And that's kind of where we are. You look at our trade deficit, that's exactly what we're doing. We're literally building relationships with other countries so that we can consume their stuff. And Trump says, no, I'm not doing it. And it's going to cost you a ton of money. Right.
Mm.
And then people are like, well, that's going to cost me a bunch of money and blah, 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 blah. Correct. Because you shouldn't have been able to do that in the first place, because it's completely unsustainable. Right. I heard the number, I'm not going to quote it on here, but take the United States debt, divide it by the number of taxpayers in the United States. It's like 185, 200 million people, something like that. They're paying taxes, should be. How much do you think each one of those taxpayers' chunk is to that debt? And then, oh, by the way, what percentage? 60, 70% of our debt is owned by China?
Yep.
So now you've got each taxpaying member of the United States society owes hundreds of thousands of dollars to China.
Yeah.
Like, it's not tenable, is my point. So regardless of political affiliation, which I'm like Switzerland, right? I just want to do the right thing. The reality is the tariffs are addressing a fundamental inequality in our economy that needs to be rectified. And rectifying that inequality is not going to be done without pain. And it won't be done at all if you don't do it quickly. And so that's what you're seeing with broad brushstrokes of tariffs, in my opinion, broad brushstrokes of, the Doge, right? Broad brushstrokes of USAID, right? These things are like, hey, we need to change. And so unfortunately, there's good folks that get caught up and good programs that get caught up and need to justify their existence and so on and so forth. And there's people who are going to be struggling because the tariffs are, impacting their wallet at the pump or at the grocery store. But I would argue that a lot of those impacts had already occurred and you just haven't even realized it yet. Whether it be eggs costing $8 a dozen or gas at $4+ a gallon, whatever the case may be, like that inflation has gone rampant. And if we don't make some changes and start to have some, nationalistic isn't the right term, but like country-based, like brotherhood of like, hey, we need to look out for ourselves. And until we start having more of that, I think that we're going to be struggling. And I think the tariffs is a way to get that. So that's my take. That's a hell of a question at the end of the podcast. So let me find that guy.
No worry, Al. I'll have to take a question for the next podcast after you. Make it difficult. Stuart, thank you so much for joining us on the Semiconductor Leadership Podcast. It was a really enlightening, wonderful discussion. It was fun. And definitely want to get you back on in future podcasts in due course. But in the meantime, I wish you all the best with DSV IMS.
Thank you.
And it was an absolute pleasure.
Yeah.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Pleasure.